It's so amazing when you're able to see something that you can celebrate on a creative level and in terms of business growth. Usually you don't get to that part. You just celebrate like, oh, wow, that's really cool. So I think the great ads are emotional and utility.
Marketing Architects.
Hello, and welcome to the Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Jasper. I run the marketing team here at Marketing Architects, and I'm joined by my co-host, Angela Voss, the CEO of Marketing Architects, and Rob DeMars, the Chief Product Architect of Misfits and Machines.
Hello.
Hi. And we're joined by a special guest, our Chief Creative Officer, Steve Babcock.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Welcome back.
Hey, thank you much.
We're back with our thoughts on some recent marketing news, always trying to root our opinions in data, research, and what drives business results. This is a little bit of a special week for us because it's Lightning Strike Week, which is a week that we spend months planning for. We try to concentrate content and promotion around a topic for that week. And the idea of a lightning strike was coined by Category Pirates. The theme for this lightning strike is creative effectiveness, specifically for video. So that's why Steve is joining us today. We're going to talk about why TV is still the heavyweight champion of advertising, but creative needs to evolve. And we're also going to cover a new TV creative research report that is out this week. But let's start as we always do with that research because we have some of our own. It's titled The New Rules of Great TV Creative. And what it does is lays out sort of a new playbook for what works for TV creative in 2025. Strategy comes first. Brands need deep audience insights before creative development even begins. Second, pretesting isn't optional anymore. Marketers only predict success about half the time, so testing creative is essential before launch. Third, today's distracted consumers demand high-impact storytelling, strong branding, and emotional connections. According to System 1, nearly half of TV ads produce no emotional response, which means most are easily forgettable. And finally, AI is transforming creative production, making high-quality, scalable content more accessible than ever. But AI isn't replacing human creativity, it's enhancing it. And the key takeaway from the report is that brands that can combine proven creative principles with new technology will drive better results. The rules have changed and advertisers who adapt will win. So, Ange, that report, it highlights some of the major shifts happening right now in TV creative, the need for stronger strategy, testing, AI-driven production. So from your perspective, why is this conversation important right now? Like, what's driving the need for brands to consider a bit of a new video creative playbook?
Yeah, I mean, the marketing world is an ever-evolving space, but I feel like we're at a really unique moment that makes the conversation that we're having today really critical, the focus and topic of discussion, because you really have three things happening all at once. The first, consumer attention is possibly the hardest to attain that it's ever been. We live in this attention economy. People are watching TV while they're scrolling TikTok, guilty, ordering dinner, replying to texts. And TV still earns more attention than any other video format, but it's just no longer guaranteed. And so what that means for marketers is your creative has seconds, not minutes, to earn attention, evoke emotion, drive response, build memory. And I just feel the old formulas weren't designed for that reality. Secondly, we have this moment with AI unlocking a new era of possibility. The old constraints of production, time, cost, complexity are just collapsing on themselves. AI is allowing us to test ideas, iterate faster, execute more what we've been calling, or I think, Steve, you came up with the term shootless creative with speed and with scale. But using AI requires a new mindset. We still want to start with insight, but then we've got this tech-enhanced execution. And we need creatives to think in terms of brand building systems, not just one-off ads. And then I think lastly, brand has always been important, but I really feel with the shift in AI is going to be your most valuable asset from a company perspective. TV still plays a critical role in building mental availability in scale. It commands attention and drives brand growth more effectively than any other medium. But as we move into a world where consumers are increasingly relying on AI agents to make decisions on their behalf, the strength of your brand becomes even more important. AI agents are going to be using proxies for decision-making, things like brand recognition and trust signals and past behavior. And if your brand doesn't readily come to mind or to the model, you risk being filtered out of consideration. And so video becomes increasingly important in ensuring that you've got that mental availability.
Yeah, lots of challenges, big and small, new tools, technology, and we're going to talk about all that today. But first, Steve, thanks again for joining. I wanted to start with kind of a big picture question because you've seen the creative industry change quite a bit over your career, and the report makes it clear TV creative, we don't think, has really kept pace with how people watch today. So what do you think is the biggest problem with how most brands currently approach TV creative?
Ooh, that's a huge question. I could have a whole lot of answers. Not that I'm some disgruntled creative person that has, there's a whole kinds of problems with the world. But I would say this, and I actually think it stems from a organizational issue typically found on the client side. Typically, there'll be the separation of brand creative department or a brand department and performance. And when it's separated at a client level, the creative itself or the executions have been separated. And so there's this mindset that, oh, there can be work that is quote unquote brand. We'll just call it good, creative, engaging, emotional. And then there's this other stuff over here that is designed to work. It's like, wait a minute. I do think that that's a huge problem. And from the creative side too, I mean, it's there maybe more on an ego level. You go to a lot of the ad festivals and things, and there's just this idea that like, oh, well, creative that works is subpar. It's not worth celebrating. And so we have a mantra that we use here that I can take no credit for because I think I got it from Rob. I'm assuming Rob came up with it. Maybe not. Remarkable work that works remarkably. Rob, is that you?
I give that credit to Katrina on the strategy team. She first uttered it.
But she's not on this.
Like,
she's not here right now.
I'll take full credit for it. Absolutely.
She's not here right now, Rob. So please. But I think that's really, it is a nice way to say it, but it's just, yeah, you can have work that is remarkable, that ticks off those boxes from a brand perspective, but that also works, satisfies the business objective. So I think that's really the biggest problem is, first of all, it's a mental shift and then also an organizational one. Put these things together. They need to work together.
Yeah, we had Lexi Wolf from Work on the podcast a few weeks ago, and she was echoing something similar that you see more and more within brands. They have separate brand and performance teams. And I think that's kind of legacy thinking too, that, you know, one creative execution has to be for brand, one has to be for performance, but their new report is sort of debunking that it actually works better. Like you can have both in the same commercial. So that's good news for us because that's something that we've believed for a while. But one of the first lessons that we have in the report is to always start with strategy. But a lot of brands, they still kind of lead with their gut when developing creative. Why do you think that could be a risky approach?
It's super risky, but I kind of understand it, right? First of all, one of the biggest risks of your gut is a lot of times you are not your audience. You are not your consumer, right? You're not able to look at it through the lens of your consumer. And so I think that's risky to just say, this is what I think. And it's really important to actually step outside of yourself, as uncomfortable as that can be. And what it usually means, we have a phrase here that we use called elephants. What is the elephant in the room? It's that very big unspoken truth that everyone acknowledges, but maybe you don't talk about. And you could also call that a consumer insight, a category insight. But real strategy is that idea of being able to unearth what that is. And if you don't do that, and you don't allow yourself to have the empathy to put yourself in your consumer's shoes and acknowledge that, like, hey, even though I want to say this thing to you as a marketer, there is this elephant in the room. You're thinking it, but if I don't address it or at least acknowledge that it exists, I'm just talking at you, right? I'm not talking with you. And I think that the best creative is kind of that two-way communication with people. And it does require that marketers and brands do that strategic work. And there's levels, right? There's always just like, well, here's an insight. And you're like, yeah, but is that interesting? You know, and that's why I think we like referring to them as elephants, because it's like, is that really there? Is there attention to it? A lot of times it'll make it uncomfortable, but I think the best work out there is work that is acknowledged, or like I said, just spoken to you in a way that understands that that elephant is there. So if you want an equation, spend 80% of your time, mental time, really getting to that elephant and 20% executing creatively off of it. It is by far the most important part of the process if you want to really connect to your consumer.
And a big part of finding that elephant, you said, is stepping into your customer's shoes. It feels like there's more ways than ever to do that. Like there's more data than ever, there's different ways to do surveys. We can create synthetic audiences. Do you think that with all this new stuff we have access to, are brands getting better at understanding their audiences, or do you think it can be a big blind spot?
Well, I think it depends on what you mean by audience. If you mean like existing audience or potential audience, right? The fringe, the light buyers, the audience that they don't actually know that is there. So I do think that, and Gospel of Steve here, I do think that we as a whole have gotten maybe a little too focused on this crazy hyper targeting of this exact persona that is our audience. And that, largely is because of the technology of social and digital that allows you to go, I'm going to send this message to the blue-eyed, blonde-haired person who likes soccer and wears shorts. It's like, that we've thought that there's so much advantage to that, and potentially lower funnel, sure, that we've maybe taken our eye off the ball of like, well, hold up. Where's our next audience? Where's this light buyer that sits next to this person that we're hyper targeting that we're missing because we're going so deep? So I actually think it would behoove us as an industry to make sure we're stepping back and going like, well, when we say audience, it should include our target, but also these light buyers, fringe, new audiences, et cetera, because that's where growth comes. And obviously life after your current audience isn't your current audience anymore. So yes and no, if I answered your question right.
And I think sometimes too, marketers, maybe they've been so focused on one core audience that they didn't even know that like a whole nother group could be also a core audience or could be a part of it, but they've been so narrow focused. I think it's fun when you put someone on TV and all of a sudden it's like, oh, women like our product too, or parents are buying it. It just gives you an opportunity to make those connections. Speaking of marketers being wrong about things, one part of the report, we talked about like predicting creative success. And we have this stat from an ad testing company that called Marpipe. They found that marketers only accurately predict creative success 52% of the time. So it's basically a coin flip. And I've come across research that it's even more grim than that. It's like less than 50% of the time we can predict what's going to work. So the report, it talks about pretesting being mandatory, or it should be mandatory, but many brands still skip it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, it's a pain in the butt, first of all. It's cumbersome. It's costly. Of course, there's things like that. I imagine in some cases there's some ego involved. I don't need that validation. I'm the professional here. In my experience, the traditional way also comes with just hordes of human bias. I've always felt, which is weird, right? Because I fundamentally believe in the power of quote unquote pre-testing, but I've always been, historically really confused by the methods that were available to us, kind of pre-technology that we use. I'll talk about in a second, but like I would always go into these rooms. They're in person. There's a one-way mirror. We're all back there behind there, just binging on snacks, while there's a group of people that somewhat represent the audience that have been paid to come out of their life and sit in a room and react to creative in an environment that is nothing like the environment of their couch, just watching a TV commercial, there's nothing scientific about it. And then they just sit there and group think and talk. Some clients who are a little bit better at it knew how to glean some of the helpful stuff out of that. And then there were some that were just like, well, that lady in the blue sweater, she said this. So creative team, change all that, and so it's like, I understand. I definitely do understand. Like, I just want to forego that. I don't see any value in that. But and I will credit Rob on this, and if you say this was Katrina, maybe it was Katrina, had developed a tool called ScriptSooth, which is based on large language models, which basically allows us, not to mention how fast it is and easy it is. It's at like a Word doc level where I can go in and get an actual metric of response based on my script. And because of that, it's not sitting in a group. It's not getting groupthink. There's no human bias to it. It's been really awesome. And like I said, how seamless it is in our process, right? It's in like the ideation process. It's not like after we've gone through all this work, fallen in love with it, had people draw pictures, flew to Denver or flew to Chicago to sit in a room. It's like boom, 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 boom. If everybody in the world would follow this approach, that number of creative success would skyrocket because it isn't cumbersome. It's not a pain in the butt. And it's actually, I think what we're finding, considerably more accurate than that old approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's great, there's a lot of great things to your point about it, but it allows our team to don't bring a client an idea that's not going to win.
Yeah.
Like we've got this database of performance history of years and years and years of both radio and TV performance. So we already know we've got validated, data to tell us what works and doesn't work. And that's how we sort of reverse engineered the AI to produce that result for us early in the process. So we don't have to bring an idea and get all that emotional energy going towards something that ultimately you put in front of 12 people in a room that have the gospel for the rest of the nation, apparently, in terms of their opinions. And does it work or does it not work? The other thing that kills me about pretesting too is this idea that regardless of the methodology, that it somehow stifles creativity. Like this, it's the romanticizing of that creative gut, when I think in the majority of cases, it's the opposite that becomes true. In a safe pretesting environment, you're allowed to think a lot bigger than you do, I think, when you're testing in market. The pretesting de-risks that and allows you to go bigger than you otherwise might have. You're taking the big stage. You're on television. And so sometimes ideas get so big that they're kind of scary. Those can be the unlocks that are really impactful if you actually get them into market.
So Steve, I was going to ask you if you've ever worked on a campaign where the testing results like completely change the creative direction. Now I'm wondering if I should reframe it as like, how often does that happen?
Yeah. I'll give you two worlds, right? My previous world and then today's world. A client who shall not be named in the fast casual dining experience years ago. This was maybe 11. And typical of that category, very boring. They all just close up shots of food and music and come get a sandwich, whatever. And we were really excited about this challenge to do something that broke out of the category, was very different. And of course, the client came to us and was like, that's what we need. We're declining sales. Everything's blah, blah, blah. And so we did. We created work that we really felt would accomplish that. By all means, like this is nothing like your category. The elephants are stampeding in this work. Like it is so rich with insight and like, let's do it. And then I flew out to Chicago and sat in a room behind a one-way mirror and watched as this group of people just dismantled everything out of it and argued. It was like I was on trial. There was like a jury deliberating. And unfortunately, this particular client was one that was like, whatever they say, we're going to do. And we walked out of there ultimately just back to square one because they were in there critiquing and basically pushing it back into that expected nothingness. Well, it should just be this. It should just be this. So it dramatically changed it, in my opinion, to the negative. And then if I come into today, especially when we first started working with ScriptSooth, this tool, it would be really interesting because I would have something that creatively I was like, okay, this is dynamite, okay, and I'm going to put it into this AI thing. And it's gonna make it boring. It's gonna come back and just be like this nice, make it lame. And I was really surprised. Well, probably it worked to my ego because in this particular case, it agreed with me. It was like, this would be really captivating. This would be really interesting. But you're missing this and you're missing this and you're missing this. Some things that I was like, oh yeah, let me fine tune. Let me tweak. Let me do this. And ultimately I kind of came in and the work was really strong from a what we'll call remarkable side, but it wasn't really strong on the works remarkably side. And what this allowed me to do was to fine tune those things without diminishing the creative part that I was really excited about and ultimately come out with something that had the complete equation. And that's why I really like ScriptSooth. Feels like I'm selling it, but I really like that is because it's at this individual level at the concept and at the creation stage where I can kind of do that before I even need to show anybody. I'm like, I've got this thing working. It's awesome to have work out there that you're proud of. And the team comes back, analytics team is like, hey, this is working well. This is working well. Like over and over and over and over versus in the old days, if it didn't work well, you're like, well, the media agency's fault or, somebody else's fault. And it's like, it's really fun to actually have work you like working.
The speed must just be huge because I can imagine if you put all this time, energy, and effort into a creative idea, it can also be hard just with the sunk costs if it doesn't test well to go back and change it. So yeah, having that earlier is nice. Rob, what about you? Do you have any pre-testing, war stories you'd like to share?
Marketing Architects was founded by a data scientist. back in 1997. And I've been with the agency for a couple decades. So I actually don't remember a time when we didn't test in some capacity. Testing has always sort of been a part of the DNA, especially back in our radio days. And while it wasn't necessarily in radio a pre-test, we were testing with audiences and we were putting what I would call like a portfolio approach to creative testing out there. So what do I mean by that? Really the opportunity of being able to honor the brief, like Steve was saying, like what's that, elephant? I love that. What's that key insight? But then how do you take a divergent approach in speaking into that brief? So you might have some ideas, if you think about like a financial investment portfolio, some stuff that's like, yeah, this is kind of tried and true, and then you have some stuff that's in that moderate bucket and then some stuff that are big swings. And putting those out there and then ultimately letting the audience help steer which direction it could go. So yeah, definitely would get surprised in that process. I've always said I'm an expert in my opinion, and boy, the audience really would tell you like, wow. And it was the audience that was actually telling you, especially in our early days, and for us to be able to replicate that now, that sort of feedback loop through LLMs has been really helpful, like Steve was saying, and also just really helps to accelerate the speed. And let's face it, creating those animatics are productions in and of themselves, right? I mean, it's like there's a lot of time and money and weeks and sweat. And then all of a sudden to have those die, it actually hurts a little more than when it's just still in its early phases of a Word document.
So part of this report, we used a lot of research from System 1, and they're a kind of a TV pre-testing company. They had a report called The Cost of Dull that I personally really, really liked because it highlights how the biggest issue with TV commercials, you would think it's like ads bombing, but it's not. It's actually ads that leave you feeling nothing. And they found that 47% of TV ads, they produce this feeling of neutrality. Like they're just completely forgettable. So that's actually the bigger risk is just me leaving people feeling nothing versus feeling negative emotions. So Steve, I mean, that's a pretty scary stat because those are commercials that make it onto TV. So what do you think separates, just a good ad, maybe like a, neutral average one from a really, really great one?
Yeah, I go back to strategy as the foundation of that and referencing those elephants in the room, which again, it requires everybody to embrace some discomfort. Not that everything has to be all crazy and provocative, but there are edges of comfort zones that when you get into them, you actually start to get into more areas of truth with your audience. So I think the best work, the great work, like I said, communicates with people versus at them because it's communicating in a way and based on a foundation of mutual understanding. Also, I mean, at the end of the day, there's also just a thing called creativity. There's things that are inventive. There's things that are interesting. And that can be in a production value. That can be in a way something is put together, a script. There's work that feels very formulaic and that can end up feeling dull. But then there's work that is just really understanding the idea and the assignment of like, I need to break through, especially if you're in a category that is typical of doing one thing. But in a higher level, if you ask, what separates a good ad from a great one, you go to a lot of industry award shows and see good ads, great creative ads. But I still think a great ad has a job to do. And that goes back to the remarkable work that works remarkably. It's so amazing when you're able to see something that you can celebrate on a creative level and then also go, and what's even more amazing? Is it did this and this and this in terms of business growth. Usually you don't get to that part. You just celebrate like, oh, wow, that's really cool. So I think the great ads are emotional and utility.
That's great. I also liked how you mentioned like there's lots of different ways to make work interesting because I think maybe sometimes we just think of it through one lens, but I even saw the other day that like sound is such an important part of TV. Like it's so memorable for people and like there's a lot of ways to make work interesting. Well, we have to talk about AI, apparently, because we're talking about creative. We got to talk about AI. And the report, it does include stuff about AI because it's a big part of creative production right now. Mm-hmm. Some people are worried AI is going to make ads more generic. Others see it as a creative accelerator. Some people are just tired of hearing about it. But Steve, where do you stand on AI and creative today?
Well, I've already accepted the fact that like we'll all just be destroyed. Like AI is just gonna and you need to get to that point. You need to get there first. Just like, yes, it's gonna develop conscious. It's gonna take us over. Like it's all happening. Got it. Cool. I love it. I absolutely love it. And part of why I'm able to say that is because I have access to it. And it's one of the things that I massively attribute to Angela here at Marketing Architects to be able to drive such a push to make sure that we have access to the tools. I have a lot of friends in a lot of agencies where they're like not allowed to even touch it, which I understand. There's a lot about it that's a little bit complex and chaotic at the moment, but the ability to experience it and to play around with it and explore it is what makes you go, whoa, this is awesome. There's so much potential. I think when you don't have that experience, it's very easy to maybe just read headlines and go, it's this and that and this, but it is an amazing tool. And that's what it is. Just as all the amazing tools that we've had that have helped us make better work faster, this is definitely probably a tool unlike one we've seen before, but it's an amazing tool. And one of the things I really like about it is it shortens this bridge that typically is this really long bridge between I have an idea, or anybody who has an idea, and then that idea being an execution. Typically there's a massive bridge between that, and it's a really expensive and it costs a lot of time, and there's a lot of room for things to get messy on that bridge. Now I can go like, I have an idea. I'm going to make that come to life. I'm going to minimize somebody having to have theater of the mind because I can make it come to life. And it's been amazing, especially even in like client presentations where previously it's like, here's a written word script. Man, we're all going to be reading that differently. Like, well, what do you mean by sunset? What do you mean by, versus here is a pretty darn close visual representation of what we're trying to create. And they're like, love it, or if they have critique, it's based on a mutual understanding of what something is in its almost completed form. I've seen so much amazing potential in just how we work in terms of developing, but also creating and producing. For example, when you go to a shoot, it's pretty final, unless you want to do a reshoot or whatever, it's like, and how many times do you get back in the edit, or you're talking with your client, it's like, oh wait, the product needs to be this, or we had an update that's this or this. Well, that sucks. But with AI, it's like, oh wait, I can fix that, or I can change that. And the technology is where it is today. By the time this airs, it will have improved a lot. It will get to a place where it's indistinguishable. It will. Like Will Smith was eating spaghetti 2 years ago, and you're like, what the heck is that thing? And now it's like, whoa. So I think it is absolutely crazy exciting. I've never looked at it as like it's replacing human creativity. We use a term here, creative engineers. That's how we think about it, because it's like we still need human tastemakers to drive the machines. But holy cow, the amount of work we're going to be able to put out because of the efficiency and speed. And we've even seen with several of our clients that have typically, hey, we'll do one or two kind of evergreen things a year versus like we can be way more relevant on occasions. Clients can start taking a social media approach to TV if you can create with this kind of speed.
It sort of allows you to kind of maximize the idea of category entry points, right? Like for a brand where there are certain brands, of course, that are seasonal, but that's something that's come up for us is when you're like, we have so much more capability, so much quicker. It really allows for you to kind of expand the mind in terms of how we can bring either light buyers in or influencers in or what have you to ultimately grow the brand.
Yeah, Steve, I like too how you think about it as like, what can AI do now to help us? I think a lot of people get stuck in that debate of it doesn't look good or it's not doing the full thing. It's like, well, you're missing out on using it for like what it's good at in the process too. But before we wrap up this discussion of the report, I want to ask you one last question, which is if you had to give brands, one piece of advice for developing breakthrough TV creative this year, what would it be?
Spend the effort figuring out the elephants. Dig deeper. And it's not just strategy team. It's everybody. All humans have the ability to understand how we think and what's real and what's true. You can have a lot of times where as a brand, you want to project just like, this is what I want everyone to think. It's perfect. But there's a lot of times where there's something there. There's something sitting there of why someone might go, I don't really think that. And just telling them that doesn't help them understand that. But So I would say definitely focusing on that. It really is the connection to a human's emotion and to the rational side as well. It's the thing that makes them go, okay, I'm going to listen because you've included me in this conversation. And then just stop, for the love of all that's holy, splitting performance and brand, please. If I can just get one plead to the industry, put those right now, call your brand manager, call your head of performance and put them in an office together. I'm getting so much hate mail right now. Put them together and the work will be remarkable work that will work remarkably. And then that 52% thing that you told me, like, which is horrible, will not be a coin flip anymore.
Aren't we glad that it's 52? I mean, we get like 2% of a win there as marketers. Like, this is what we've been doing our entire lives.
I know. I was like really excited about this podcast until you threw that up there. I was like, oh, my parents were right.
I've wasted my life.
Maybe we need like a podcast format where we bring in like brand and performance people and have like a
that'd be a great show, like
showdown,
a debate. Yeah. Well, it's like a matchmaking kind of game where it's like, hey, you guys actually do get along.
Yeah. So this week, I said we're doing a lot of promotion, and one thing we're going to share is a press release about some of the generative AI enhancements that we've made in production at MA. And that's been with the help of Rob and your team at Misfits and Machines. And one challenge that we tackled together was there's this consistency issue with AI generated video, especially if you're trying to, add in logos, product details, and maintain your brand's sort of unique style. But Rob, you developed a LoRa-based approach to solve this. I know you know all about this. You're an expert on LoRa's. So can you explain how they work?
I'm a real big nerd, so you're going to probably cut out a lot of this explanation. Obviously, the big challenge with text to video, let's just say like Steve's got really cool headphones on right now. And let's say I want to do a TV commercial using those headphones, and I want to use Steve as the talent in that commercial. I can't go to one of the many text to video generation platforms out there and go, hey, put this bald white guy like me, I can say that because I am one, in the TV commercial with these headphones, and all of a sudden you get a piece of video that looks like that, right? It'll take a really good guess and it will produce all kinds of different cool looking headphones, but it won't produce those headphones. And if that's your point of your ad, is to show an ad with those headphones in it, it's just not going to happen. We all know that's not going to happen. So how do you solve for that? The first thing you have to do is to teach the AI what your product looks like. And that's done using something called a LoRa, or a low rank adaptation. What you do there is you train the LoRa with 20 to 100 different still images, and the AI gets really good at understanding what it looks like. Now, the crazy thing is you can do that with humans as well. So if you want to train the LoRa to also understand what Steve looks like, you can do that. So now you have what's basically like a plugin that's been trained that you can now take and use with something called Comfy UI. And Comfy UI is a graphical interface that works with Stable Diffusion, which is one of the main technologies out there enabling us to do all these cool image generation. And basically, Comfy UI is like a workshop that works with Stable Diffusion. It has all kinds of different tools and experiments that you can run with it. And so if you know how to put the right tools in the right order, you can have Stable Diffusion do all kinds of things, like create generative images that are true representation of Steve's headphones and what Steve looks like. And basically, if you think about it, it's like one of those Rube Goldberg. You remember those Rube Goldberg things where you put together a bunch of random things, like you flick a lever and it shoots a marble up and it rolls down a runway. Like, that's Comfy UI. That's how you're assembling these things together. So if you can get the right combination together, you can then generate those outputs. Once you have those outputs, you can then use image to video to create pieces of video using many of the platforms out there, Runway, Luma Labs, Ray2, VO2, and then ultimately create those pieces of video that look just like the product, indistinguishable from the product in any environment you want, and you can generate them super quick.
You did a great job explaining it. It's a little hard on like an audio podcast, but there are videos on the Market Architects LinkedIn page if you want to see what it looks like. because it's pretty cool.
Cool.
So in that same release, we talked about the future of shootless video production. And Steve, I believe that you're the person who coined that term.
It was Katrina.
It was stole it from
Let's get her on here.
What do you think? Are we really heading towards this world where brands never have to shoot traditional commercials? Or do you think we're going to have more of a kind of hybrid approach?
I think in the near term, it will be hybrid, obviously, because there's a lot that has to happen. Technology needs to continue to advance, and us humans and our client partners need to be able to embrace it. I always think it will be hybrid in terms of human as engineers driving the tools. I'm excited for it to be shootless. I love going on shoots and cameras and doing all those things. And there's nothing against any of that other than it is very finite. It's a gamble. I think I've figured out in my life that I'm a pretty anxious person, and our traditional approach has just wreaked havoc on like my anxiety, because I've been on many sets where I'm like, all these people, all this money on an idea that I hope, I hated that. And I think one of the reasons I love this notion of shootless is that it just removes that. The risk is so diminished because I can create in a way that doesn't mean mobilizing key grips and cameras and trucks and clients and all this stuff. So I do hope so. Again, I'm very realistic to notice that it'll be a while, but the more and more people can get on board with it. I think for us, when we started developing this notion of shootless, it's probably way ahead of its time. Or doesn't need to be, but I think for us, we're so excited about it. That's like, let's get really good at it with where the technology is now. Tons of limitations. Shootless requires you to concept in a very small box. We're not creating a spot that has a person talking to camera, because at the moment AI cannot do that, but tomorrow it will. And so I think that's really exciting. And that's kind of part of it, is like, as creatives, at first there was a mindset of like, oh, this sucks, because I'm used to having the freedom of being able to do it, and now I can't, because I can't get the tool to do this. And it is dramatically shifted to like, this is amazing and incredible, and every day it gets better and better and better. So yeah, it's hybrid now. I don't know if there'll ever be an industry standard. For me personally, it's so exciting, and the things that it unlocks, and the freedom and the potential that it unlocks for our client partners, all for it. Plus, I don't like leaving the house anymore. So I could sit here.
Steve.
I can sit right here and make it all happen.
It's a big bonus
to
that. Well, Ange, we've covered a lot of big and potentially overwhelming topics today about, just producing video creative. So what do you think is kind of the biggest takeaway a marketer can have after listening to this or reading the report?
I think it's just like really getting real about, are you operating with a 2005 playbook creatively? Because it is uncomfortable. And there are different aspects that we spoke to today. Update your creative process. I mean, just start with one component of it if you need to, but to Steve's point, make strategy is the starting line. Test before you commit. Design for a way that people actually watch TV today. Embrace AI, not as a threat, but this new creative superpower. Just start knocking those blocks down. I think when you get into it, to your point, Steve, like there's a lot emotionally and bias wise that people just hang on to, this romanticizing of your creative gut. But as you get into it, you start to identify new wins that maybe you hadn't thought of before. And ultimately the name of the game is driving sales. And we really believe that a lot of what we talked about today is essential to be able to do that really well.
Love it. Well, let's end with something kind of fun and keep up this creative theme. Steve, we'll start with you. What's one piece of creative work? It could be an ad, a song, a painting, a film, really anything that you wish you had made.
Oh, that one's easy. So I grew up in a very small one stoplight town in southern Idaho. And for whatever reason, as a youth, I was going to make movies. Like I wanted to be a director, a big movie director. I didn't know anything about it. Would use our little family camera and make movies. And I remember really wanting to make a movie about what it's like to grow up in small town Idaho, because it's just quirky and weird. And then a guy named Jared Hess went and did it, and it's called Napoleon Dynamite. And I remember watching that in the theater. I was later years in college, and I actually teared up. I'm the only person who maybe cried in Napoleon Dynamite because it was so accurate. And I've since worked with Jared Hess, and we've become friends, and he was from a town just down the street. But yeah, Napoleon Dynamite to me would be, I wish I would have got to that one.
That's lovely and unexpected. That's great. Ange, did you have something in mind?
I do. I don't have a great story, but a space that I just don't even come close to belonging to is the musical world. And to me, absurdly brilliant is Queen, and specifically Bohemian Rhapsody. Like if I could put my name on that, I would just be like, I can die now. I did it.
You made it.
Mm-hmm. Rob, what about you?
I don't play the piano. I've never written a song, and I can't really sing well. But I've fantasized being in a room filled with friends, which is already a fantasy because I don't have enough friends to fill a room, and sitting behind a piano and playing anything from Elton John, particularly maybe your song or something. I would love to be able to do that, but never have, never will.
That's funny because we're all on the same like musical page, which that's what I was thinking. I am obsessed with Cynthia Erivo. She was in the movie Wicked. She's an incredible singer, and she sings Defying Gravity, and the notes that she hits at the end of that song, I actually cry when I watch it. Like I'll just go back and watch her perform at the Oscars and just start crying because it's so amazing and she's so talented. I'm like, man, what would it be like to have that type of talent where everyone's sitting there tearing up, listening to you sing? It's like anything she does just sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. All right.
So good.
Well, that's kind of wrapping us up here. If you're interested in the report, you can go to marketingarchitects.com. I'll also say that Ange is doing a webinar tomorrow with one of our clients to talk about the report and just creative in general. Yeah, April 16th at noon. So if you're interested in that, you can find that on our website too. So thank you, Steve, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. We'd like to thank Taylor De Los Reyes for producing the show. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you like the podcast, please leave us a review. Now go forth and build great marketing.
Marketing Architects.